One of the fundamental changes that have taken place since the foundation of the Arctic Circle is the growing role of Asian countries in Arctic research, Arctic science, cooperation, businesses, and so on. And that is why we have decided to have a session here with a number of representatives from Asian states, starting with an opening remarks from Singapore, and then moving on towards India, China, Korea, Japan, in order to underline in a very strong way that whereas many people thought in 2013, when these Asian countries were accepted as observer states in the Arctic Council, they are now playing a formidable role, especially in Arctic research. And at the forum that the Arctic Circle had in Delhi in beginning of May this year, it was striking to listen to a presentation by a group of Asian scientists explaining, and I had never heard that done before in such an elaborate way, how the changes in the Arctic sea ice, the thinning and the melting of the Arctic sea ice is fundamentally changing the weather patterns, the monsoons, and therefore the food production in Asia. It is perhaps in human terms, giving the billions of people who live in that part of the world, the gravest consequence of what's now already happening in the Arctic, because the melting of the Arctic sea ice has a direct relation to the moisture in the air and the rainfalls and the monsoon patterns. That's why, for example, Japan now has 4 seasons every year instead of 2, which Japan traditionally had. So let me invite our Asian representatives to the stage, please.
Thank you, Chairman Grimson. Excellencies, Arctic friends, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Huang from Singapore. This is my first time in Iceland. It's such a thrill to be here. It's a beautiful country. And I want to thank Chairman Grimson for inviting Singapore and allowing us to be an observer country of this Arctic Council. The theme of this plenary session, Melting Arctic, Asian Futures, reminds us that what unfolds in the Arctic reverberates across the globe. As the world faces deepening fragmentation and uncertainty, the need for collective efforts to tackle this existential threat has become more salient. The statistics are sobering. As we've heard earlier on, the Arctic has warmed at nearly 4 times the global average, with accelerating ice loss in Greenland and Antarctica now contributing about 25% of global sea level rise. The impacts of accelerated Arctic warming are felt far beyond the Arctic, including in geographically distant regions like Asia. Singapore is 1 degree north of the equator and thousands of kilometers away from the Arctic, yet our fate is intertwined. Rising sea levels pose a grave threat to Singapore, as about 30% of our tiny island is less than 5 meters above sea level. Coastal cities in Southeast Asia, like Ho Chi Minh City and Jakarta, face similar challenges. 898 million people globally live in low-lying coastal areas. Now, Singapore has thus invested heavily in climate resilience. Today, 70 to 80% of Singapore's coastline is shielded by stone embankments and seawalls to minimize coastal erosion. Now, in August this year, we also announced the implementation of storm surge barriers and raised platforms at our southeastern coastline to combat rising sea levels. We also completed our first polder project, a 10-kilometer long dike to guard against flooding and channel excess rainwater collected out to sea. And this is not enough. More has to be done. Our efforts are complemented by nature-based solutions such as mangroves and coral restoration, which provide added protection against shoreline erosion. In December last year, Singapore launched a coastal restoration effort to plant 100,000 corals over the next decade and beyond. Looking further ahead, the Singapore Green Plan 2030 sets out an ambitious goal to plant 1 million more trees and green 80% of Singapore's buildings by 2030. Our carbon tax will be progressively raised to strengthen the impetus for businesses and individuals to reduce their carbon footprint. Singapore has also established the Financing Asia's Transition Partnership Initiative, or FAST-P, and committed up to US $500 million in concessional funding to deploy blended finance to fund green and sustainable infrastructure in Southeast and South Asia. Our efforts reflect Singapore's commitment to inclusive, science-based, and forward-looking climate action, both in Singapore and Asia. Now, a rapidly melting Arctic will profoundly impact maritime and shipping networks, and Singapore is very reliant on shipping. UNCLOS sets out the legal framework within which all activities in the oceans and the seas, including the Arctic, must be carried out. An international rules-based framework for Arctic shipping based on UNCLOS is important for safe and responsible shipping throughout the Arctic region. At the third United Nations Ocean Conference in June this year, Singapore reaffirmed that the health of our oceans is a shared global responsibility. The health of our oceans is a shared global responsibility. And we are proud that Singapore's Ambassador for International Law, Ms. Rina Lee, played an instrumental role in stewarding the negotiations that led to the consensus adoption of the agreement under UNCLOS on the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction, or BBNJ in short. This is a treaty that's vital for protecting the high seas, including parts of the Arctic Ocean. Singapore has consistently participated in the Arctic Council working groups, sharing our knowledge and experience in areas such as the prevention of oil spills and the protection of Arctic migratory birds. Singapore's researchers also contribute actively to other areas, including our National University of Singapore students and researchers in the International Partnership for Acoustic Monitoring of Glaciers, which studies glaciers through acoustic sensing. In July and August this year, our researchers also conducted fieldwork in West Greenland to refine their acoustic and computer vision techniques for tracking glacier melt. I know it's hard to believe Singapore is a tropical country, but we do take a strong interest in what is happening in Arctic, including the melting of the glaciers. Singapore also recognizes that indigenous peoples are the most affected by what happens in the Arctic. We have hosted several representatives of the Arctic Council permanent participants on study visits to Singapore, and we look forward to welcoming more in the future to exchange views and experiences and for us to learn from them too. We are also refreshing the course offerings of the Singapore Arctic Council permanent participants cooperation package to ensure the relevance of these causes. Excellencies, Arctic friends, rising temperatures in the Arctic knows no boundaries, and no country is immune, and no country can afford to act alone. We must share research across borders, co-develop solutions, and support vulnerable communities. Now, Singapore will continue to share our experience and expertise with the Arctic Council and the Arctic Circle Assembly. The Arctic can count on Singapore as a committed and reliable friend in the years ahead. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, and please join us here. And since there are only a few months since we had the forum in India, in Delhi, maybe Rear Admiral Prasanna, I start with you. If you can, following the success of the forum in Delhi and all the declaration of India's vision of enhanced role, Can you summarize for us a little bit how India sees its engagement in the Arctic in the coming years?
Thank you. In fact, we gave our Arctic policy in 2022, and the title itself is Building Partnerships for Sustainable Development. That actually defines our policy, and all the 6 pillars that policy has is centered around this broad title that we gave to ourselves. Science and research is the first pillar, followed by governance and international cooperation, transport and connectivity, national capacity building. So therefore, our complete focus on Arctic is science and science-based research, so that we can have predictive models and adequate data to ensure that our monsoon, which is the most important factor as far as India is concerned, and how Arctic affects us. So this connectivity is more or less proven, at least theoretically and by observations. So therefore, if we can get enough data and we can forewarn our farmers, and agriculture can be undertaken with those predictive models, then we can be well prepared. Repair is easy, but preparation is more important. So we will be prepared. So, and we have 1.46 billion population that we fed. It's an agrarian society, and I have the 80% almost of my agriculture is monsoon fed. So therefore, we are dependent on the monsoon. That is the reason why we are interested in the Arctic, and that is the reason why our primary focus is science, and science is the main one. All other, I would say, what we have in the Arctic, whether it's resources or anything else, are secondary. Yes, we will be interested, but back to the title, building partnerships in collaboration with the nations, we will go ahead. Thank you.
China. Yes.
Yeah. So talk about,
Yes. Thank you for being with us. I know it was decided later on.
yeah.
So.
Since it's my first time to talk with you on behalf of my delegation, I need to congratulate this session and your chairmanship. And talking about China's policy on Arctic, I think we need to just remember very few keywords. First is respect. Respect sovereignty rights and jurisdiction of Arctic countries. And but on the other hand, I think Arctic countries also need to respect non-Arctic countries' rights in accordance with international law, with the United Nations Charter. And second is cooperation. We need to cooperate each other to deal with challenge within Arctic area. Third is win-win result. Why we cooperate? I don't like to use competition, because this morning I said competition means one win and another one winner, one loser. It's not the outcome China want to see. We need to use a win-win approach. Last word is respect, is sustainability. So sustainability is a UN Millennium Goal. So it's also our goal to reach in our tackling with Arctic issue. So for this purpose, you know that last month President Xi proposed. We called it Global Governance Initiatives. So that is why we regard we can use that initiative to deal with to deal with Arctic issues. So we call it GGI, Global Governance Initiative. Its main concept is to equality of sovereignty, equality, and abide by international law, and to practice multilateralism and to use people-centered approach and to take action. Last one is take action. So under such GGI to the specific Arctic region, we think it's very simple for us to do just 3 matters. One is to uphold multilateralism and to let our Arctic governance to represent inclusiveness and representativeness. That's why Asian countries come to this forum, and if I may say, I heard about A5, but here is also another A5, to understand, Asia 5, right? It's not only Arctic A5. Another thing is that we must safeguard international law, and for everything we did and we do within the Arctic region, we must based on the international law. Last one is that we must, as I said, sustainable development and make a balance of protection and utilization. We need to take into account both protection and also utilization. Otherwise, you will not make development in Arctic very sustainable. That is my very brief.
Well, thank you very much. And before I turn to Japan and Korea, can I ask you, there are now, 4 or 5 years, definitely, since China published its Arctic policy.
Yeah.
Are you planning to issue a new Arctic policy in the near future, or you will let this old policy stand?
Yeah, yes, Excellency, you have a very good memory. In 2018, actually, in 2018, China released the first polar policy from Chinese side. We call it white paper. I think if so, according to that white paper, that is why all of our approach and our cooperation with dear partners, we are based on that white paper. So for me, I think that paper has already played a very important role for China's tackling with Arctic issues. But for the new white paper on China's polar policy, so I can only tell you that I have no idea at this moment. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'm not encouraging you to make a new one, but a lot of things have happened since you issued the first one. So let's go to Japan. So, yes.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. President. And again, let me start with Japan's Arctic policy, which was adopted in 2015. And if you have a look at the policy, there are 3 pillars. One is research and development, the second, international cooperation, and the third, sustainable use. And of course, when it comes to the research and development, Japan is among the first country to participate and collaborate with researchers from the Arctic. We established the observation station in New Orleans in 1991. And since we joined the Arctic Council as an observer in 2013 with the other Asian countries, we have been participating in all the working groups and provided data and information and share almost 100% of what we have to promote the research activities in the Arctic. And I was told that the Japanese researchers gain a very strong trust from the colleague researchers in the Arctic. So this type of approach will be continued. For the international cooperation, of course, one of the big motivation is how to address the climate change. And today's discussion also touched upon this climate change cannot be solved just by the single country, and the international cooperation is very much needed. And Typhoon Haron recently struck Alaska, supposed to attack Japan, but it shifted to go to Alaska. Fortunate for Japan, but unfortunate for the United States. I think this type of international collaboration is much needed, and this is Japan's basic approach to enhance international cooperation. And of course, shrinking ice is worrisome, but at the same time, a lot of people talk about opportunities, such as Arctic shipping route and resource development. So we rather want to put more emphasis on sustainable use of all of the resources. And this importance cannot be overemphasized. So this is another aspect which we really want to promote. In any case, Japan is connected to the Arctic through the Pacific Ocean. And free and open maritime order governed by the rule of law is really the national interest of Japan. And I think this principle is very important for the maintenance of peace and security in the Arctic. So we're going to continue working to promote this type of idea. Thank you.
One of the things that has not perhaps gained the attention it deserves is that some years ago, the Central Arctic Treaty was successfully negotiated and then signed by an extraordinary group of countries, including the United States, Russia, China, Korea, Japan, European Union, Iceland, Norway, and so on. And I think in the present situation, it is very important to realize we have this Central Arctic Ocean Treaty, and Korea has, in recent years, even after the invasion in Ukraine, hosted the COP meetings, the Conference of Parties, successfully with all these countries I just mentioned. So as you present the vision of Korea towards the future of the Arctic, can you perhaps make some comment of how you have succeeded in maintaining the COP process of the Central Arctic Ocean Treaty?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, it's always my pleasure to visit Reykjavik. And always this forum inspires me to think about the Arctic issues from different perspectives. Well, Korea's Arctic journey, to make a long story very short, we are trying to be a trustful partner to the Arctic states and also the non-Arctic states. For the last some decades, as an observer state of Arctic Council, Korea are using our research capabilities, assets like a research station and icebreaker research vessel. We have been focused on meeting the common challenges of environmental protection and responding to climate change and promoting sustainable development and joint scientific research. Also, we are trying to promote rules-based order in the Arctic region. For example, as Your Excellency said, CALFA, Central Arctic Ocean Agreement, is one good example. Korea was an initial signatory to the agreement several years ago. I think it's 2021, before I assumed this position. But after we signed the agreement and after the agreement entered into force, we hosted a series of COP meetings in Korea. And the fourth meeting was held in Norway this year. I think it is very important to try to improve the governance in the Arctic region because it's going to prevent some unregulated fishing in the Central Arctic Ocean until we have some authorities to regulate all the fishings. So the initial signatories, including Russia, has participated in this COP meeting. I think there must be a lot of considerations to whether we invited all the signatories. But I think this is one good example that some necessity for the scientific collaboration or cooperation for improving the governance is much more important than sort of the politics. So even though we need to some more negotiations and consultations to make the agreements operational, but I think we will continue to discuss with the signatories and stakeholders to improve the governance of the Arctic states. So Korea, as a trustful partner, also the contributor of our research capabilities and our experience in international cooperation, we will continue to work with Arctic states and the non-Arctic states to make Arctic region as more safe, as more open, and more stable, and more peaceful. That is our part of our Arctic vision, and that is parts of what the Korean government has done so far.
Well, thank you very much, and let us open this up to the floor. If we can have the lights up in the hall, and you can put questions to each of the panelists, or to a few of them, or all if you want to. But please appreciate there are 5 people here, so if I allow all of them to speak in a response to the question, we wouldn't take very many questions. So please, put your hands up. It's a unique opportunity to engage with the, yes, please. State your name and
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Yu Wu, and I'm part of the HKH Arctic Youth Leadership Forum, and I'm from China and only one youth leader from the China. So thank you so much for the panel, and at the recent UN Climate Change Summit in December, China reaffirmed its strong commitment to global climate governance through the new commitment of the nationality determined contributions, and which includes like ambitions on renewable energy, climate reduction, and etc. So given that the climate change in the Arctic is a global concern, my question to the Chinese minister is, well, we are certainly hope for comprehensive cooperation between the Arctic and Asian nations like China. What are the key priority levels for China in the near future of cooperation with Arctic Circle? Thank you so much.
Okay, so who wants to take this question? You're all being yes.
She wants to China.
Yeah.
Yeah.
May I?
Yes.
Thank you for your question. I think if you follow climate change issue, you will be very aware of China's President Xi. He just declared our new national NDC, national NDC. Yeah, we are contribution to the climate change. So there are some figure I will share with you that is about China's NDC. So by 2035, reduce economic-wide net green gas emission by 7 to 10 from peak levels. That and China we are striving to do better. So and also the China's national NDC will cover all economic wide and cover all economic sectors. So for the cooperation, for the climate change in the Arctic region, I think China will focus on three aspects to do the climate change issue happened in Arctic region. One is that we need to establish a very peaceful and stable environment. So if there is no peaceful and environmental and stability and stable environment, there will be no basis for China and other concerned countries to deal with climate change. Second is that we need to input sustainable sustainable movement to the Arctic climate change governance. Climate change actually, in essence, is a development issue. And then I will set a very good example before your country and my country. We just released China and Iceland joint statement on geothermal energy and green transition. So that is, I think, that is a very good example between Arctic country and non-Arctic country to deal with climate change bilaterally, and I think, and I hope that kind of model, kind of example can happen not only between China and Iceland, and also between this Arctic region country and non-Arctic countries. Third one is that we think to deal with Arctic climate change, to dealing with it, we need to enhance bilateral and multilateral cooperation. So I think that is why, from the perspective of China, we also want to see the normal work come back to the Arctic Council. So if Arctic Council can work more normally and to return to its red track, I think it will to provide for the Arctic region political impetus to do environmental protection and sustainable development. That is my comments on.
Well, there was a question here from the middle, and while you bring the microphone, let me just draw the attention to the fact that the future of the Arctic, the Greenland ice sheet and the Arctic sea ice, will be to a large extent determined by the energy system that these countries that are represented on the stage will adopt in the coming years and decades, as well as other countries in the world. So we have this relationship of joint fate or joint future, that if the same energy system is being maintained in the rest of the world, the Arctic sea ice will continue to melt, the weather patterns in Asia will continue to be messed up, the Greenland ice sheet will be melting and the sea level will rise. And it is a very dramatic proof of how our joint fate is interlinked and how the future of the Arctic will not be determined in the Arctic or in any of the bodies, whether it's the Arctic Council or the Arctic Circle, but will be largely determined in the countries that you represent here on the stage, as well as Africa, the Americas, and so on. So I just wanted to bring that, and that's why we welcome in Iceland this joint agreement on geothermal energy. It was just issued in Beijing and on the state visit of our president. So let's take this question, yes.
I believe I go for it.
I go for it. Leif Lundsman, Denmark. In continuation of your comments, we have heard today many times that what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. And you give very convincing arguments for the A5 nations on stage, to be around the table when discussing developments in Arctic. But within this definition of a stake in the Arctic, which of the 48 Asian countries are not included in that definition of having a stake in the Arctic? Do you understand the question? The A5 represented here argues for a stake, your stakeholders in what happens in Arctic. Which nations in Asia or in the world are not and should not be observer nations to Arctic Council in the future, to your mind?
Good question. So let me go to this end of the panel. You can choose whether Japan or India go first. Yes.
Me?
Yes, sure.
Yeah. If I follow the logic of my presentation, I think all the Asian countries have stake in the Arctic Ocean. Yes, I think so. And we start to notice that more and more countries start to be interested, involved in the activity related to Arctic. And in that sense, Japan can be the supportive position of harmonizing all those newcomers into the activities of Arctic countries. So now we think we find a new role. And I think pay good attention to the Arctic by the lot of countries will create better environment. And Japan really want to play a positive role in this process.
Yeah. Admiral, you want to add on that?
Well, in the same context, I think the future of the Arctic is more increasingly interconnected with the future of Asia and the other parts of the world. So I think the stake is very high, and also it's affecting all of the Asian countries. I think the future of two areas is interlinked in the three aspects. First, climate change. It's affecting the rest of the world, including Korean Peninsula. We have experienced lots of abnormal weather events recently. And also economic opportunities being offered by the receding sea ice. So we are pretty much considering that we need to well prepared for the Arctic sea routes. And also return of the geopolitics, which is merging with the geopolitics of the other nations, particularly in the Pacific. So in one hand, we need to take some concerns and the risks into careful considerations, but we need to go forward, and we should not take the power of engagement for granted. So some more active diplomatic engagement and collaboration and cooperation would lead some more stable Arctic region, I believe.
Prasanna, you want to add something? Then I will come back to you. Yes.
I mean, I would say there should not be any exclusion. Everyone is included. It takes 100 people to build a house, but one guy to break it. So everyone needs to be included, and we should get people together, and we should move together. Only then we can achieve what we want. Even I mean, let's say too much of emissions of greenhouse gases by one country will still cause to a certain amount of problem as compared to maybe two countries having those many emissions. Therefore, inclusion, there's no exclusion. Everyone needs to be included, and together we can, it's a problem for everyone. It's everyone's problem. We need to solve it together. So no, I don't see any reason for any exclusion of anyone to solve a problem.
Yeah, I'd like to add that apart from being inclusive and understanding that global warming, climate change, rising sea levels, these affect almost all countries in Asia, Singapore included. We are not spared. I think it's important to recognize that the level of impact and the degree of development of each country in Asia is different. And each country brings with it different value and support to this ecosystem. I think the more we can harness the strengths of each player, each country, the better we can progress and have more effective solutions. Singapore is part of ASEAN, Southeast Asia. 10 countries, soon will be 10 plus 1, with one more country joining us. And within our part of the world, we are also looking at regional solutions. ASEAN Power Grid is something that we hope to be able to achieve in the next 10, 20 years. It's a regional grid that will allow renewable energy to be exported across borders so that countries within Southeast Asia that have the capacity and the ability to generate renewable energy will be able to export renewable energy to countries like Singapore and give us additional solutions to be able to meet our net zero ambition. Thank you.
Well, unfortunately, our time is running out, and after this, we will have a very unusual event taking place here in the hall as the final item. But let me say before we conclude this, if we add up the scientific capabilities and contributions that all these countries represented on the stage jointly make to Arctic research and polar research, there is no Arctic state that can match that scientific research capability except the United States if one includes NASA in the US equation. But if NASA is excluded, I think the combined scientific contribution that these Asian countries are making to understanding and mapping out the future of the Arctic and the science on the melting of the ice and also in Antarctica has become a major contribution to our understanding of what's really happening in the Arctic. And it's one of the fundamental reasons why we continue to invite distinguished representatives and also a great number of scientists from your countries that are present here at the Assembly. And we are very grateful that ever since from the very beginning of the Arctic Circle Assembly, we've had this major Asian participation. Because I think it's important for us in the Arctic to understand, because we have a tendency to emphasize it's just us as a closed club that deals with the future of the Arctic. But we are being helped in understanding of the future of the Arctic and what's happening, not just to our part of the world, but how the melting in our neighborhood, both the sea ice and the glaciers, are having fundamental impact on the future of Asia. And I remember at the first assembly when then a distinguished representative of Singapore was here and was asked by many baffled Arctic participants, why is Singapore interested in being part of an Arctic dialogue? And then he became an observer state in the Arctic Council. The answer was very simple. He said, what's happening to the melting of the glaciers and the ice in the Arctic is the most serious security threat that Singapore faces in the 21st century. Simple statement, but also very profound. And since then, we have been privileged to have all of your countries. We have hosted forums in, I think, all of them, or very extensive Arctic meetings. And I hope we will be able to continue that cooperation in the years to come. And with these words, I thank you for being with us here on the stage. And now the lights will go on and be ready for the final of this plenary program on the first day of the Assembly. Thank you.